Hi and welcome back. So we're going to jump in and start doing the texture work on our original prop, ready for that final implementation. So with this, we've got a few things on this that are quite straightforward, and a few things that are going to require a little bit of attention. But hopefully this sword tutorial shows you a few tips and tricks that we can embed into our workflow for your original prop. So here we are with our actual asset. We're just going to go ahead and make a new scene. So I'm going to go to new project, hit that, and I'm going to find my files that I've been using previously. So I'm just going to go to 3D Mesh and hit select. I'm going to find my sword low poly from earlier on. And we're just going to click open. I'm going to keep this at a 2048 by 2048 texture. I don't want it to import cameras. I don't want to auto unwrap, and we just need to make sure it's set to Unreal Engine starter assets. So I'll hit create, discard this previous, and it's just going to bring us in to this sword. So with this, before we do anything, we need to do our bake. So I'm just going to go to the little croissant at the top right hand corner. I'm going to find my high poly scene, and we're just going to click on here and find our high poly, and it's just going to give us that projection. Bear in mind that high poly is huge in terms of poly count, so we just need to be mindful of it potentially taking a bit longer depending on the hardware we're on. I'm going to tweak my projection. I'm keeping it on distance based, but I'm going to tweak my projection just so that I've got none, if any, well, none, if at most, very little red visible, which 0.0025 has worked appropriately for me. And we're just going to hit bake selected textures to apply that through. There we go. If I just go back to my paint, we can see that's applied that detail quite nicely with the filigree that I've worked with earlier, as well as that stencil that we put on the blade using our sculpting tools in Maya previously. So for some of these bits, I'm going to, just like with our chest, I'm going to work with some existing smart materials. For other portions, I'm going to build these materials up and edit them from scratch. I'm just going to get rid of this initial layer that's on the side. We don't need that. But with that, we're going to jump straight in. I'm just going to start out with our handle, and we're going to create this using a leather texture and building that up alongside some other fill layers within here. So I'm going to start out just on my layers panel. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm just going to rename this leather handle. There we go. And I'm just going to build a fill layer in there. I'm also going to go to my textures. So we've got textures on the left, smart materials just next to it, making sure I'm just in standard materials. I'm going to find a leather one, and I quite like this leather skin one when it's got a nice grain to it. So I'm going to bring that over, and I'm just going to drag this into our folder above the fill layer. Actually, we'll take that down to the bottom. So it's at the bottom of our fill layer. And that is giving us this nice little grain that we've got here. I'll just hide my new fill layer for now and go into my leather skin. I'm actually going to remove everything bar the height on this. We'll actually keep the roughness now that I think about it from that. No, we won't actually. We'll just get rid of everything but the height. And what I'm going to do just on the general properties is I'm going to find the tiling, and I'm just going to scale that up a little bit to really, really refine in the, the grain of the texture, make it a much tighter weave, for lack of a better word. So with that in mind, we're then going to move through and just adjust some of these points. I'm going to adjust the grain intensity because it's a little bit thick for my liking, and I'm just going to tweak some other points. But with that, we've now got our grain in position. On my leather handle folder, I'm just going to add a black mask, and on that black mask, I'm just going to select the shell for our handle that we're working with, so we can now see that coming through on here. For this fill layer, I'm going to apply a roughness and a metalness mask on this. So I'm going to add a brown color for this. So I'll just try and find a nice hue that matches what we want. There we go. That sort of color will do. I'll make it just a touch darker actually. And currently I'm not satisfied with the roughness and metalness. It's a little bit too shiny for me. So I'm just going to bring the roughness down a little bit, and same with our metalness. I'll just keep that quite low. Give it a slight sheen, but nothing too much. And, we could leave it there. I think I'll lower the color a little bit more and adjust the roughness a little bit. I'm going to bring that up a little bit just to give it a slight sheen off the light, but nothing reflective. But I want to add a bit more detail to this. So with this fill layer one that I've got here, I'm just going to hold Control and press D for delta just to duplicate it. And we're going to sort of make a different mask for, we're going to use a mask on this layer to add some wear marks and some extra kind of texture to this piece. So we're getting all this height data that we've got from the leather skin underneath, but we're getting the rest of the material layer from these two, or the rest of the material data from these two layers that we're working with just here. So on this fill layer 2, first things first, I'm just going to darken it a bit and drag it so that hue is a little bit more vibrant. Just make it slightly brighter. I'm going to adjust the roughness a little bit so it captures a little bit more light, and I'm just going to touch the metalness a little bit as well. But on this fill layer now, I'm going to add a black mask, and on that black mask I'm just going to hold right mouse button and I'm going to apply a generator. And we've got some choice. By all means, experiment with these and how you can use them. I'm actually going to use the fiberglass edge wear for this, and if I just click that, it's going to start giving us a crisscross. I can just change the wear level a little bit, and you might see it, especially if I bring down the roughness on this, we might see it coming through. But what this is going to do is allow us to sort of intersperse the actual material. We can see it's getting darker on the outside of these strips that we modeled in one of our previous videos. With that, it's a little bit sharp in places, so I'm just going to adjust the smoothing on that as well as the curvature weight, and we can see that's just bringing bits in a little bit. There we go, it's just bringing those towards each other a little bit more. And then just to fill it all out a little bit more, I'm just going to go to our mask again, and rather than adding a generator, this time I'm going to go to filter, and on this filter I'm going to actually apply a blur, and it's just going to allow us to blend it through. I don't want the blur to be too strong, but I do want to add that little dappled texture. And even though it's not a massive difference between the two, it does apply a nice little mask of detail around these outer points. So with that in mind, that is our actual handle done. For our hilt, for our pommel and our actual guard, what we're going to work with is we're just going to build a copper. So I'm going to go to our smart materials this time, just in the top left, and we'll find a copper. And I really quite like the copper red bleached, and there's some tweaks we can do to this, but I'm just going to bring this in for now, and I'll drag it, well, I'll keep it where it is, but I'm going to add a black mask to it. So black mask, and what I'm going to do, rather than using our shell fill, actually no, rather than using our object fill, I'm going to use our shell fill. And first I'm just going to allow it to persist through on all of these top portions up here. We can see it's slowly filling up our UV on the right hand side here. Now there's some bits that I quite like about this. It gets the tone, it gets the edge wear, everything like that, really, really nice. But there's some bits that I'm not keen on. For instance, I don't quite like the sharpness and what that's doing to the texture, so I'm just going to get rid of that sharpen layer that we've got there. And this is something you might want to do with smart materials as you utilize them to build assets in future, is if you're going to use them, go through it and see what you want and what you don't want. For example, I'm not keen on the sun bleach either, so I'm going to remove this because it's just unnecessary data currently. The edge damages I like, however, I'm going to do some adjustments to those and just tweak the balances and the contrast on them a little bit, just to change how they work with these points. And on that material as well, I'm just going to adjust the height ever so slightly so it looks a little bit battered and worn. The surface details, just turning on and off, quite happy with those. The dirt I quite like, however, once again, there's a little bit too much dirt for me, so I'm just going to bring that down a little bit so we've got a little bit more reflectivity, and we can see that applying through quite nicely. I still need to adjust the mask for this so that it applies to the hilt, so just going to my black mask on here, I'm just going to go to my polygon fill, and this time I am going to use my object select, and I'm just going to select the hilt down here as well. And that's a nice straightforward one to play around with and apply, but I really quite like how this colour and the balance of roughness and metallic captures the light as we go through. It's a nice little touch to have for this. I'm going to build up a material now that's going to be shared between, well, that's not going to be shared between these two rings that go around here, and this is a nice straightforward one. We're just going to go for a decent steel look on this one. So I'm just going to create another folder just in our layer editor over here, and we'll call this handle guard. Actually, we'll call this something different. Handle connectors. Remember, you're the only one working with these, so you can call these layers what you want, but you still want to have appropriate layer names to help you. So with that, I'm going to add a fill layer to this now. And on that handle connectors, I'm just going to add a black mask. I'll change my color up to red so it's something very easily seen, just because these bits can be a little bit finicky to work with, and it's just going to allow me to very easily work with and find the objects. So just going to my shell select, just going to go through here and start applying those, and I can apply them on our UV map as well, but it's just about making my life a little bit easier so I can see everything. There we go. I think that's everything selected. One more just there. We've missed one, just this one here, and these ones in the center as well. But there we go, we're nice and set up. I'm now going to remove that color, well not necessarily remove it, I'm going to adjust it on our fill layer. And because we're going for a steel, I'm just going to go for a sharp grey to begin with, and we'll apply a roughness and a metalness channel to these, and we're just going to tweak these to look a little bit sharper, or a little bit more metallic. So I'll bring that metallic quite far up for this. Bring these to line up just here, and I'm quite pleased with the sheen on that. So now we're just going to add some wear to this piece, and for the most part this is just going to be similar to what we've done with our handle of working with the layer we've got but masking it appropriately. So I'm just going to press Ctrl D on this fill layer 3 that we're working with, and I'm going to actually bring the metallic down a touch and the roughness up a touch just to make it a little bit more flat. And with this layer that we've now got, I'm just going to add a black mask. And on this black mask, I'm going to add a generator. For that generator, I think we're just going to go with, let's go with dirt. And we might add another one to this. So I'll bring this down. There we go. It's not applying in the most detailed fashion, but that's perfectly fine for now. Remember, we're working with a very small resolution here. We can see if I was to remove this, it's just adding that nice little bit of sheen that we might see dotted about. I'm also going to duplicate this layer again, and I'm just going to hide that previous one so I can work with it a bit easier, and I'll remove the mask off of this one as well, just so I can adjust the color. And I want this grey to be really, really, really flat. So I'm just going to bring that roughness down and that metallic down. I'll add a mask to this, and I'll add a generator to said mask. And for this generator, we're just going to go with metal edge wear just there, and I'll bring that at a level and that contrast down a touch. And we've now got several layers that are all intermingling with one another to work with this. And if I wanted this to work a bit stronger as well, I could always bring a height channel into this and just tweak how it functions, and I could do the same on that flat one that we've made, and perhaps just have a little bit of wear and height applied with that mask. And it's just about building up layer by layer, with each one of those layers having a specific function. So with that, I've got 3 layers that are working in tandem on this piece, all of which are serving a particular function. And it's especially visible just up here, where this outer one is our most, worn parts where there's no sheen left on the metal. This one just here is leaning into a little bit of sheen, and then this one is quite shiny. If I was to remove them both, we've got a nice shiny look through, but it all links up quite nicely and builds up, and that's even more noticeable on large scale portions of a mesh. That just leaves us now with the blade, and we're going to spend some time with building up the blade to make it look quite worn, quite utilized, quite nice really. And that's the biggest focus, is making it look good. So once again, I'm just going to start out with a new folder, and it's just defaulted to inside our handle connectors folder. So just be mindful of that. I'm going to call this one blade. There we go. And we'll just build a fill layer inside of this. And like we've done previously, I'm going to start out just by making the core blade color as if it was perfectly clean. On that blade folder, I'm just going to add a mask, and we're just going to apply it to our actual sword. So just selecting through here, making sure it's hit appropriately. There we go. And I'll just bring it down a little bit in its color. And we'll just adjust the roughness and the metalness to get that sheen that we want to work with. Make sure you're moving that light around often so you can get this, so you can see this in a proper light. Especially important when you're working with roughness and metallic channels. There we go. So I don't want it perfectly mirror sheen, but I want it something close. There we go. So we've got that. We could just leave it there. It looks okay, but we've got a lot of wear marks that are visible all around the top of it, and we want to have a one handle and guard without a one blade either. So this is where we're going to start building it up. What I'm going to do with this piece, I'm just going to add a new. I'm going to duplicate this fill layer. Sorry. And similar to what we've done with the handle, we're going to adjust the roughness and meltness, but I'm actually just going to change the color on this as well. So I'm going to find a bit of an orange hue. Something like that will be perfectly fine. But I'm going to turn the roughness down to pretty much nothing. Same with the metalness, and make it incredibly flat. And then I'm just going to go to this layer. I'll add a black mask to it. We're just going to add a generator on top of it. And this generator will just work initially with metal edge wear. There we go. And initially off the bat, we've just got these wear marks, but I don't like the lack of height to them. So I'm just going to bring a height channel into this. And I'm going to bring that in. So it just brings it in, these little dimples, as if it's one. And that brown color we've applied to it is to really accentuate a look of kind of disuse or disrepair that I want to put into this piece. I'm just going to raise that value. Let's go to minus 0.2 or 0.02. There we go. It's looking a little bit shiny, so I'm going to go back to my fill layer 6 and I'll just tweak the metalness a little bit and the roughness just to make it a little bit less reflective. And in that fill layer 7 on our metal edgeware mask, I'm going to work around with the actual layers that we're working with. So I'll adjust the scale initially, which is just going to be how big portions of it are going to be until I'm quite pleased with it. I'm going to increase the amount a touch, as well as the contrast. That's going to allow us to grow those particular points. I don't want the contrast to be too high, but the wear level, I just want to be tweaked just right. So there's a little bit of visible wear throughout, but not a huge amount all over the piece. It's still a functional thing at the end of the day. As well as that, what I'm going to do for this, I am just going to tweak that height value a touch more. Make it a little bit starker. And on this layer, I'm just going to adjust the roughness and the metalness. Give it a little bit of a sheen on those points. And you can just see the lights changing as I tweak that roughness value. There we go. Because more than anything, like I've said many times now, we're looking for that worn aspect to it. One additional point that I'm going to do to our blade as well is I'm just going to add a dirt channel to it as well. So I'm just going to hold Control D on that fill layer 6. I'm going to flatten out the colour quite a bit, but I'm going to increase the metalness of it just to give it a little bit of sheen. But I'm now going to add a mask to this. And on this mask, I'm just going to add a generator. For that generator, we're just going to find one for dirt. And it's just going to give us this kind of rough patina that we can see throughout there, just to give it that final worn look. So it's used, it's chipped away, but we've also just got this nice little roughness mask on it. We can continue to play around with these, just adjusting the contrast and the levels of these points as well as the amount. But I'm just going to tweak these until I'm quite happy with the final point for it. But even just that one layer with the roughness and the metallics adjusted with the dirt channel makes such a difference to making something look a little bit more believable or realistic. And it's a really good opportunity to really play around with the toolkit that you've got available for you on this piece. So there's one more thing that I want to do, and this is more of a, I want to say taste, but that's not quite right, but a little addition to this. I want to make this look recently used, so I'm going to add a little bit of splatter to the blade itself. So I'm just going to hit our new folder. I'll bring it above our blade, and I'm actually just going to add a black mask to it and make sure that mask only applies to our blade just here. In that folder, I'll create a new fill layer. We can see it's come through. It's got a lot of the stuff, like the roughness channels and such, already applied to it, which is perfectly fine. It's overwriting the color, however. If I was to go through and start going over these, it would just cancel out a lot of the stuff that's there. But with this fill layer, I'm just going to initially build up with a colour. And I want it to be a sort of blood red, so I'm just going to bring that through, and I'm going to bring the roughness in. I'll make the colour just a little bit darker around that sort of point. But with this, what I'm now going to do on here, on that fill layer, and I'll just rename my folder to battle underscore where. What I'm going to do with this fill layer is I'm just going to add another black mask to it. And on this mask, we'll add that generator. I'm going to try and find... It's not a generator actually. There it is, dripping rust. There we go. So dripping rust is quite nice because it gives us this sort of splatter where we can adjust these points as well as smoothness between points. But we can just adjust that drip intensity as well as the smoothness of these points and the samples. And that on its own is obviously looking battle worn. It's a little bit intense, so I'm just going to lower the spread of it just a little bit, just make it look like it's recently been used. But what we're also going to do is we're just going to add a little bit of height to this blood as well. Not too much at all, just enough to look like it's surface level. There we go. And what I'm finally going to do, just to kind of bring this down, is I'll just half the opacity of that layer. And we can see just bringing it down to about 50%. It's looking recently used, but well maintained over time. And Substance Painter is a really, really strong tool for this sort of approach to how we can actually build up assets like this. The amount of control you have just by bringing in new layers for each individual portion of your mesh and adding different generators, different filters, different masks to really let the layers blend together appropriately for your outputs is really, really quite strong. So as you're moving through your original prop now, and as we're moving towards that summative assessment, really think about the cool stuff that you can do with this. Experiment, take apart existing smart materials and start applying them to your own piece. Obviously, if you do have any concerns or questions about how to achieve a certain look or aesthetic to the things you're building, feel free to reach out to myself or another member of staff. But with that, we've now got this original prop sword ready to go into Engine. For now, I'm just going to save it up. So I'm going to go to File, Save Scene As, and with that, I've just got a 3D Substance Painter or Substance 3D Painter folder in my Fantasy Sword files. But with that, you need to make sure you're storing stuff appropriately. So if that's in your source images folder for the project, or source images folder for your original prop, or somewhere else, just make sure it's appropriately placed and easy to work with. I'm just going to call this Fantasy Sword project. And with that, we will do our export in the next one while we look at further implementation into Unreal. With that, I will leave you to it and see you in the next one. But if there are concerns, please feel free to reach out to myself or another member of staff. Do take care.